However, it comes with its vulnerabilities. And so I think when COVID happened, the first thing that big organizations said is that, do we have the capacity for all our workers to be working from home at the same time? So it was always possible for a fraction of their employees. So maybe they said, okay, at a certain time, only 20 or 30% of our people are actually working from home. Let's say banks, for example, and 70, 80% of the time, everybody's in the office. So, or maybe even 70, 60%. But not all organizations were ready to deploy let's say, all the tools needed to have 100% or let's say 98% of their staff working from home. So I would say that was the very first stumbling block for both small but medium, but also for some large organizations that are still working in a very analog system. Yeah, and this is not unusual. I know we think that, Europe is a very advanced country, but you'll be surprised even in the financial sector, where a lot of the processes, procedures are still done in an analog way. And at the moment, a lot of these organizations are going through digital transformation. So not everybody was ready to react. So what they say, preparation is the best prevention. If you're prepared, then there are better chances that you can prevent. On the other hand, when it comes to cyber attacks, you have to almost think of it as an inevitability. So there was a shift, let's say 5 years ago, where people were thinking we have to protect our perimeter, we have to prevent an attack, make sure that the wall stands, that we have a thick wall that cannot be penetrated or cannot be attacked, that we can have this protection and security. But in spite of all the budget being thrown to buy all these tools, these technological tools, it hasn't really prevented even major financial organizations with huge cybersecurity budgets. It hasn't really prevented the attacks. It's easier to attack than it is to defend. And so this mindset has slowly actually been changing to the mindset that a cyber attack is inevitable. Now what we have to actually focus on is how we respond to the attacks. So incident response is now getting a little bit more attention and more relevance, because you should know how you should do. You should have a playbook if the cyber, and it will happen. So they say it's not if it happens, they say when it happens. Do we have a playbook? Do our people, our staff know what they should do? Have our staff been trained on this? And now, so the focus has been slowly over the years been going to this direction, because we see that major organizations that don't have any reason to be attacked are being attacked. Yeah, and that's because there's also been a huge shift in the last 10 years that cyber attacks are not only random hackers or random groups of hackers. There's the criminal group and there's the nation state attackers. And what we're seeing now is that the nation states and the criminal groups are working together. So if a nation state decides to attack a certain organization, it really doesn't matter how much you put in to your cyber defense, because it's so much easier to attack than it is to defend a system. So yeah, so the interest of people, the focus of people have been going to crisis management and incident response and business continuity. How do I recover? And I would say this is how we should all think, even in a personal level, because all our information are actually for sale. Let's say these are our own assets. So my own personal information, they call PII, personally identified information. These are all actually for sale in the dark net. So it has a value, even if it's just 1 or 2 euros value. If everybody's data is out there and it's that cheap, you know, that you really need to do your due diligence for your own self, but also for your organizations. So like what happened with you, Anna, and your meeting the last time, you were Zoom bombed. The result of that is that now you are actually more careful. So what you see here is it's not just resilience, and we're going to have actually a forum on this in our organization. How do you go beyond resilience and you go to the concept of anti-fragility? I don't know if you've heard anti-fragility. So with anti-fragility, with each attack, you actually get stronger. So it's like maybe, how can I say, like the weeds in the garden, the more you pull them, the more you get. Okay, I mean, so they're not just resilient, they actually get stronger. So resilient is you survive an attack. Whether you improve or not, it's not important, but anti-fragility means you thrive when you're attacked. And so one way of looking at it was a trauma experience for everyone. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is that this attack made you stronger. You've increased your due diligence. You've gone online and you'd had to look at the Zoom blog post. Zoom has a blog post on security. You just need to go there, and there are several tips on how to secure your Zoom meetings and your Zoom webinars. And they're fairly easy to execute, actually. So that's one thing. So it works for organizations, and it works also for individuals. So that's the COVID-19. I mean, on one hand, we're all in this trauma of the economy, all of us having to work from home, the screen fatigue, having to have children at home and having to juggle all these responsibilities. On the other hand, we've also seen how not just resilient, but actually stronger, let's say, some organizations have, especially, those who have been forced to, to not just survive, but to actually grow stronger and to increase their capabilities. So companies that before COVID were not actually ready to have all their employees working from home, because it's easy enough to set up the system, but whether the system is secure is another thing. So, and you have to acquire new servers to accommodate everybody working from home. So this is something that people had to invest on to get their people working on, and quickly. And so I think that one of the effects of COVID is that we're realizing that it's all possible. It's possible, and it's relatively safe. I mean, say relatively, it's not safe, but it's relatively safe. It's not because of COVID that we have more data breaches. Breaches were happening even before COVID. So we are even more vulnerable now, but it seems like it's not, the nightmare that we were thinking. And even Zoom, if you look at Zoom as an organization, if you see the trajectory of the pre-COVID Zoom and not post-COVID, but we're still in COVID, how much they've increased their security and how much more valuable their organization is because of that. So they've increased the value of their organization. So this trauma experience resulted in a higher value, for their, I'm not sure if they are already a public organization. I think they are, but I'm not sure. But anyway, the value of the organization increased. So this is where cyber attacks actually become stimulants for companies to mature. And I think that's the same thing for people, on the micro level, people, small organizations, medium-sized enterprises, and large corporations and organizations and enterprises. There are a lot, of course, of organizations or a lot of companies that have gone bankrupt. That's for sure. Um, so I know for a fact, though, that some of them were already doing bad pre-COVID, and COVID just pushed them to the edge of the cliff. So yeah, so that's it. So that's for COVID. And let's say cyber threats, I would say cyber threats stay the same. I mean, we have ransomware. How does ransomware go in? What phishing is one way for all the attacks to start. So there are different kinds of attacks. You have ransomware, you have data breaches. So a ransomware means that you don't have access to your assets, to your data assets. So when you think of cybersecurity, there are three, let's say, main things to think about. You have to think of safeguarding confidentiality. So your data should not go into the hands of people who are not supposed to have it. There's integrity. They should not change the data. The data should be should remain what it is. Nobody should tamper with it. Imagine if people were tampering with all the bank account statements. You know, they make people richer, make people poorer. So that's integrity and availability. It's like a DDoS attack or a ransomware where you can't access the website or you can't access your data. So these are the three main ways of crippling or attacking, let's say, or an organization. And each organization has different focus. Like, for example, maybe a team in charge of trade or stock exchange. Maybe their number one focus is availability. You know, each second that they're not in the system, that the system is down, means a lot of losses for them. You know, so now again, it depends on what organization, what your, here comes the business side, why the business is so important. You have to understand what your business objectives or what the objectives or mission of your organization is. And after understanding those objectives, trying to see, well, what are our assets that we need to protect? So what the cyber professionals always ask is, what are your crown jewels? You know, what is the crown jewels of your organization that if that were stolen, that's game over? And it doesn't even have to be a tangible asset. It could be reputational loss as well, that then makes you lose your business. So, so that's about cybersecurity and COVID. And as for human rights activists, well, you already know, think about who are the threat actors who would want to, you know, create damage and to harm human rights activists. There are lots of people out there. There's the right-wing activists. There could be even national governments. So the first step is to first know whose interest it is that you are harmed or that your data is stolen. So you have to understand who are the threat actors you're dealing with. And then you have to understand, well, what's my crown jewels? You know, and then you have to see, okay, how did it, honestly, if it's a nation state trying to get to your crown jewels, then that's what they call an advanced persistent threat. That means they don't stop, that this, let's say, their attack on your system goes for years. That means they're really trying to find a loophole, and it doesn't have to be a technical loophole that they get into. It could also be personnel. So there's also the insider threat, or you know, somebody inside who has been planted, who is there to take data out into the. So this is very common that you see that a human rights group could be infiltrated. It could even be infiltrated by the police, right? This is also something possible. So you have to understand who are the threat actors, and then think about all the ways that they will try to get what your crown jewels are. And so so yeah, human rights activists have to really level up their game when it comes to cybersecurity. They have to know what apps they can use that are safe, that will not track them, that they have to understand the organizations and the missions of these organizations of that build these apps. For example, what email provider should I use? You know, that's safe. Gmail, I would already say no, don't use Gmail. If you're a human rights activist, you have to go for a email platform that encrypts the data that they themselves cannot have access to, you know. So Gmail, you can forget about it because Google has access to your data. And even if Google is a very, let's say, holy organization, you don't know what the employees of Google are, where they're coming from, and if they have ulterior motives or if they've been planted by whatever to get access to your data. So and it's that simple. You have to get apps that are created by organizations or companies whose values and mission match your needs. And there are several out there, whether it's text messaging applications or emailing platforms. There are a lot of tools out there that you could actually use just to increase your cyber hygiene. Let's say it's again, technological tools can only go so much to protect you if you have an insider or if you're a social engineering attack, like they say, oh, you know, they'll already try to think, okay, you know, they already do reconnaissance. If they want to attack you, they really do their homework. They try to find out where your weaknesses are. They'll know, okay, she has children in this age, they go to that school, they know the names, they know, and then they get, I mean, if it's a human rights activist, they will put in a lot of effort to find out the lives about these people and then try to social engineer themselves into these people's lives. Like say, oh, you know, I'm the teacher of your child. They just called. You have to do this and do this and that, and without having to think about it clearly or have the steps to verify whether it's the right person. Sometimes you get into an emotional state where you're not thinking anymore. So we are all vulnerable to this. So even cybersecurity professionals themselves who do this day in and day out, they also have families. They're human beings too. So we are all vulnerable to this. And so yeah, so that's actually, but just think like the way you reacted, the way Zoom reacts, what's the best way to react to an incident and how will it strengthen us instead of bring us down or just, you know, how do we go beyond just surviving an attack or an incident? So that's it. And then I think that somebody asked about cyber resources for small organizations. So there are actually a lot out there. I'm not sure if you want me to name names, but maybe I can tell you just what the tools that we use ourselves. So for example, we use Proton Mail as our email platform. Proton Mail is an application started by some scientists at CERN in Switzerland, and it's complete end-to-end encrypted, meaning they even don't have access to your data. They store your data. They're all encrypted. So if you lose your key or your password, then you lose everything. They cannot help you recover your data. So that's one thing. I mean, there might be others, but that's what we're using right now. So it's protonmail.ch. There are free versions like at Gmail, but if you're an organization, you can also get your organization's domain name. So for example, cyberwayfinder.com is behind that, it's Proton Mail. So that's for emailing. As for texting, text messages, well, there's a lot out there. I mean, there's Signal. I guess you're all familiar with Signal. Some people prefer, let me just think of why. There's some people that prefer Telegram. Basically, this is like a Russian organization. So I do have both. I have Telegram, I have Signal, and there's a new one or something that I'm just testing out. It's called Sessions. And this one is even safer because they don't keep your your mobile phone number. You have to set up your session number, I think, and this session number is what you share. So that means this application has no access to your own mobile phone number. So there are lots of ways to protect yourself, but it really starts with just searching, just like the way you looked at Zoom. How do we actually secure Zoom for our meetings? Well, you go online and you look at the website of Zoom, look at what other people write and how to protect. And it's the same way for all these tools. Another thing is having a password manager, so making sure that your password is changed every 3 or 4 months, or at least, they what they say, it's like your passwords are like your underwear, so don't hang it outside. Change it often, and keep it private. So it's like the best way to do it is to get a password manager to have them generate also safe passwords for you, but also to constantly change them. So if you could go to the website, have I been pawned? Have I been pawned? So have I been pawned is PAWNED. I'm not sure. I think Irina, you might know this, is Troy Hunt. So he has a great website. If you go there, you put in your Gmail address or whatever, and you'll see which data breach your Gmail address have been hacked. But don't worry, because usually they will have had hacked it some years ago. So as long as you're changing your password regularly, but in addition to that, also enabling two-factor authentication on all your important accounts. And this again, it's actually not that difficult. So you have a Gmail account. If you enable two-factor authentication, that means it's not enough for them to have your password. They also have to have your phone with you, or they have to have several other things that they will have to make sure that you have. So it's not just one thing, but it's two things that they need to have. Something which is your passport, and something you have, which is your phone. Or it could be your face. So it could be, they say, scanning your face through your phone, or it could be your finger. It could be. So this is what they call multi-factor authentication. It's not just one factor that they. So email, you have to, especially if it's a Gmail, enable two-factor authentication. These are the basic things. So if you look at these big organizations, they might pour in a lot of money into their perimeter defense, but then forget that the people who are actually working in the organization are themselves unaware of how to keep themselves safe. And then they become the entry point for people to get into the organization, or the system of the organization, and then to access data that they're not supposed to access. Another thing is just making sure that, and I see this in a lot of organizations, and I tell you, even the best organizations have problem with managing the privileges, access privileges of their people. So for example, you as an organization, you will probably have a Google Drive or something, and you all have access to it. Well, what happens when somebody leaves? Do you have a policy to make sure that that person who leaves loses access, and you know what I mean? So in the small organizations, it's pretty easy to organize this, but even small organizations have troubles with this because we have so many accounts. There's a Dropbox account, there's a Google Drive account, there's Slack, and all these, you have to make sure who has access to all these platforms that our organization uses on a daily basis. So just making sure that the privileges, access privileges are updated, are often reviewed. And in a big organization with, let's say, 1,000 employees and a retention rate of, let's say, 2 to 3 years, meaning there's like a turnover every 2 or 3 years at different times of the year, then that means you'll have to have somebody monitoring, reviewing all these access privileges on a daily basis. So, and it becomes very complicated very quickly. So, and these are simple things, yeah, who has access to my data? And, but because there's several systems, there's several data, there's several databases stored in several platforms. It becomes quickly very complicated to make sure that nobody who leaves the company still has access to one of the other platforms, you know. And this is often the problem with tech startups. They have their developers coming in, they have access to the source code, they're writing the code. And usually these developers, especially in tech startups, they don't have the hardware to provide their developers with laptops. So in the end, these developers are bringing their own devices into the office and accessing the source code from their own device. And because in the tech sector, developers, it's also a very high turnover rate because the market for the job market is very good for these people. So, you know, they get an offer that's higher, they leave, and then you ask themselves, okay, does that person still have access to the source code? So these are really simple questions. So you don't even have to think about the more complicated stuff. So yeah, cybersecurity is actually not, you know, you have to start with the basics, and already covering the basics is a huge challenge. So that's one of the things. So for smaller organizations, if you start designing your organization and you keep security in mind, then while it's still small, you have that culture of security of always doing uh, um, uh, practicing due diligence and making sure that, okay, you have a policy for onboarding people, you have a policy for taking out the access rights of those people leaving the organization. So if you just have a procedure for all this and you have a small organization, this alone, this procedure alone can be very valuable already. So you don't even need to buy any tools to make sure that you're safe. And if you look at all these cities being hacked and all these organizations being hacked, it's usually a really, really simple thing that they get hacked for, and it's amazing. So cover the basics first. Already that is makes it already more difficult. You know, when you buy a chain for your bicycles, you go to a store, usually you have the different chains, and then it says there how much time does a person need to break those chains. So this chain, you buy it, it takes someone 10 minutes, this one 15, this one 30, this one 40. That means they can break it if they want to. It's just a matter of how long does it take. So at least for 10 minutes, you know, if they already see, okay, it takes more time, because these people are business people, the hackers. They have to think, okay, what's my cost benefit analysis? You know, do I, you know, put in so much of my time just so that I can get something that only costs me so much? You know, what they're doing is that they're just getting the low-hanging fruit, the easy hacks that gets in, and then they get it and they skim all this, and then they get all the data, and then they sell it on the darknet, or they sell it to a wholesaler. It works like an underground economy, and it works so much similar to the way we see business here. So it's just making it difficult. It's never going to be impossible. If somebody wants to get your data, they will be able to get it. That's just a fact. But how long do you want them to do it? So that's, I think I covered.
Yes,
and I'm
thanks
not sure
a
if I
lot.
talk too much.
No, you're very useful. I already have the huge list of tools
Yeah.
and some tips on how to stay protected for us, for the alliance, and for us personally. Maybe just a short clarification. It's about the Zoom bombing. So something what happened to us during the last meeting. Let's say we did all of the required due diligence, but it didn't work. Somehow someone got access to the link to the Zoom meeting, and they managed to access, and they started showing some videos or saying some things which they said during our last attack. How do we react? Should we just stop the meeting and leave it immediately and don't do anything because we cannot do anything, or should we try to find who is this person doing that and try somehow to fight back? What would be the best strategy in your opinion? Thank you.
So first, the best strategy is to have a playbook, no matter what it is, to just have a playbook. So what do you want to do? If something like that happens, do you want to resume it? I would say this link for this Zoom meeting, I think you should just get rid of it. That means you just end the meeting and you can start a new one. And this is something you could do if before that you had a playbook procedure to say, okay, if this happens, this is number one, step 2, step 3. Either you want to resume and create a new call and then make sure that only these number of people are in, or you say, we're going to stop it and we'll resume the next day and everybody gets a new link. So it's up to you. The only thing important is that you've had time to think about it, and you'll think, okay, what if that happens? What is the best scenario for us actually? Well, on my personal opinion, if it's toxic material they're showing, then I don't want to see it, right? If it's pornography or if it's violent film, I really don't want to see it. So for me, I just cut it. I don't want to see it. I don't want to pollute my mind with such ugly, violent, let's say, video. And also, I don't need to hear that, BS that they're saying about whatever, women or whatever. So I don't want to have that in my system. So I would, that's my personal decision. I would not hear it. I would just end the meeting. But everybody in the meeting knows, and especially those people who are important, know about the playbook. They know, okay, she's probably going to stop it, and you will go back to your, let's say, network, the way you communicate to the people, and say, okay, we are going to reconnect tomorrow, or we're going to reconnect in 2 days. We're going to. And I think also that it might be possible to even go to the police, but I'm not sure. It really depends. So in order to go to the police, it's a little bit more complicated, because you have to have a little bit more information for them to work on. And I think somebody was saying something about digital forensics. So this is something that you have to know, what is it that they need in order to launch something, to find out who it was. So you have to have maybe the list of participants. You can say who it might be this or that, but the chances that they find it, because these hackers will probably be very low. They'll probably not be able to find. And not all police departments will have somebody who's in charge of digital safety or digital cyber safety, who will know actually even what you're talking about. So it's not unusual that you go to the police and they have zero idea of what you're talking about, and there's no way you can start. So I would say is that you have to think about it before it happens, how you're going to react, and make sure the important people who need to know this playbook are aware what the next thing is going to do, so that you can just go to the playbook. So in responding to an incident, usually you shouldn't think about it. It should be a procedure that you just follow step by step. And that procedure depends on what is it that you want to do. And then you have to decide with your team, if this happens, what do we want to do? Do we want to resume? Do we want to resume today? Do we want to resume tomorrow? Or do we actually take a break for one whole week? I mean, you can decide on that, what it is that you want to do. But you have to make a playbook that says these steps, the procedure, and everybody's aware, and then everybody just follows the procedure. They know who it is going to, like Anna is in charge of this, Irina will be doing this, Liliana, you will be doing this, and then we do this. So it's just like a playbook. And it doesn't have to be so complicated. It could be say, okay, who is the host in this meeting? So like Stella was saying, okay, I'm the host and you will be my co-host. So is it been defined? What are the responsibilities of a host? And what's the responsibility of a co-host? And so you guys will be will be managing actually the call. So you two will have to know what your role is. In case of an event or an incident, you both should go and act. Maybe what you do is you send a chat and say, everyone, we're closing this call. And it just closes. I don't know, but you have to have that procedure decided, especially between the host and the co-host, I would say.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Rosanna. It's an amazing tip. We will definitely need to have a playbook or the work plan, how we are dealing with the Zoom meetings. I think Veronica has also a question. She raised the hand.
Yeah, I have a question because I really appreciate everything you have said. And some of these recommendations I have tried to use myself in convincing, usually organizations to adopt them. My main challenge, and this is also a question to you, is to convince them that it's actually worth, in the first place, investing in having one person designated for security issues, and second, investing even in paid options. So basically having a security budget, because so far I have a feeling we are in kind of a stone age situation where people, including companies, let alone civil society organizations, are hard to convince. And sometimes it's like this stupid argument they bring, and I'm sorry to call it like that, but it is stupid. And that is, I don't really have that sensitive data that in case of being hacked, it's really worth investing money. So what would be the argument we can bring, or what we could do to be more convincing?
Oh my goodness. That's a really good question. I have to say that like 4 years ago, before that ransomware Petya, not Petya, I don't know if you remember that. I think that was 2017, could it be, or 2018? Before that, it was really, really hard to convince even people who had the budget. Usually the people hard to convince are the people who don't have the budget, or are already working on a shoestring budget. But before that, even people who had the budget didn't bother to think of it, because they thought, no, it's going to attack us. We are not a bank. We don't have the money. We don't have anything valuable that can be taken. But after not Petya and Petya happened, and the ransomware, that they were even organizations hit that were not targeted. They were just like, how can you say, it was like they broadcast and sent this to everyone. Even those people who are not their targets got targeted, and this was unintentional. So you could be targeted unintentionally, and in the end, you just paid a ransom. I mean, you can see it now with cities. That the problem is that people who are getting organizations that are getting attacked or breached or are suffering ransomware, if they can hide it, they will hide it. They will not disclose it. But if it's a big organization like Maersk and they can't deliver stuff, and their customers are waiting, clients are waiting, then there's no way they can hide this, and then it ruins their reputation. But for the cybersecurity professionals, it was actually something good came out of it, if I may say so, in that there was less need to convince people. So unfortunately, the best way to convince people is when they are victimized. Unfortunately, that's the best time that they can be convinced. And it's just the truth. I mean, here, even in Belgium, small, medium-sized organizations got hacked. They were hacked into, or they were victims of ransomware. And ever since then, I think that the job of cyber professionals, especially those working in cybersecurity awareness, got a little bit easier. But I have to say, it's also the company culture, because in some companies, and this is a truth, if you were a victim of the phishing mail, and this is true, if you were the one that clicked on that phishing mail, the reaction before, and some organizations still reacting this, is that they would fire you, especially if the boss wants to know who clicked on that email, and the person who clicked will, of course, not want to disclose it because they know there will be consequences. And so that's not conducive to good cybersecurity, because you want your employees and your staff to not be afraid to disclose that they clicked on something, or they were somebody called them and they let somebody in, or whatever, that they were the, let's say, the weak link in the chain. And the problem is because they know there's consequences. But if you think about it, if you reward people for actually telling, then more people will, even if they're not sure if it was a phishing mail, more people will say, I think I clicked on something that might have malware in it. And that makes it easier to detect when it happens, because the problem with cybersecurity is that usually you are hacked 1 year or 1.5 years after you've been breached. That's the only time you realize it. So that means this hacker had been going through your system for a year already. And sometimes you're not the one they don't want to attack you sometimes, but they're looking for clients that you have or people in your network that will lead them to another organization that is actually juicier. There are more things that they can steal from. So unfortunately, if you convince people to people to invest in cybersecurity tools and getting professional help to set up a comprehensive cybersecurity strategy, the bare minimum is that the people should have that culture enough and openness to be actually talk about when they think that they have allowed somebody into their system, because that is also something valuable. And the only cost is building up an open culture in your organizations, what you call a culture of safety, where people feel safe enough to disclose things like this, knowing that there won't be consequences for them. So it's very hard, because it's just human nature that when they say the first thing you want to do is you want to do the forensics of how, and you want to find out how they got in, and the person who got in will feel bad unless there's that culture that they didn't have to find out by forensic analysis, but because that person came forward and said, I think I clicked on something, or I think I got an email that was, let's say, trying to impersonate one of the executives in our organization. Sometimes there are executives whose email was breached, or and then they are sending out emails, or maybe they just want to get into your organization, so they try to get the names of the staff. So they really, I'm telling you, they go through a lot of trouble, especially if the crown jewels are there. If it's worth it, they will really put in a lot of trouble to get to know your organization, so that it's hard for anyone, and I'm saying everyone, even the most seasoned cybersecurity professional, they fall victims to this. It's just human nature for us to trust people. It's just, that's how civilization works. Civilization works if we trust each other. If we don't trust each other, it's hard to build a city, or it's hard to build a network, infrastructure network. So it's called the trust default theory, and that makes it hard. So I would say, if an organization doesn't want to, has a very minimal budget, then you can say that just by creating some kind of cybersecurity awareness training, and you could do it, and that is already goes a long way. And that budget for that doesn't have to be high. It's just about building up this transparency, this culture of transparency and openness, so that your employees become your eyes and your ears, let's say. They become your eyes and your ears. So if if something happens that
you know, instead of hiding the fact that, oh my God, I think that I might have given access to somebody I shouldn't have been given access to, whether it's physical access or digital access. Creating this culture, you know, sometimes if you have an executive team that believes in this, just the executives lobbying for this and trying to talk to staff about this is already enough, you know. Sometimes, you know, if it's a small organization where the executives can easily create the culture of openness. For big organizations, of course, it's more difficult. So I would say, if the reason, so understand why they're saying no, we don't need it. Understand why they are saying this. Usually they're not saying this because they think that they don't need it. Usually there's another reason. Maybe the reason is, well, actually I don't have the budget for it. And that might be a real, I mean, that's a relevant reason. It's significant. You can't say, okay, or maybe they say, you know, they say something, but what they really mean, you'll have to try to investigate and then try to get to the bottom. So that's what you call, you know, an empathy map. I'm not sure if anybody here works for design thinking. Mm-hmm. So an empathy map, yeah, is where they say something, but they actually mean something, and you'll have to investigate and see what is it actually they mean. And when this person says, oh, I don't think we need to do that, then you have to know why. What's the bottleneck? What is his real fear? And then maybe you can address that fear, you know. And if it's a cost fear, then try to give him a cost benefit analysis. Look, with this much money, we can do this. With this much money, we can do this. And then you need to do a risk assessment yourself. You say, okay, you know, this is our crown jewels. This is the most probable scenario that might happen because we're a hospital, and, you know, hospital, the medical records is our crown jewels. You know, the medical records are very valuable. So how do we protect it? And then, you know, then you can think about different cost structures. Okay, you know, the bare minimum is we do this, and then you have to know what's the impact, you know. And then so unfortunately, sometimes you might have to prove qualitatively why it's worth doing that. And that requires a little bit of knowledge on how to do a risk assessment for cybersecurity. And as risk assessment usually will be convincing, because you will say, okay, you know, and there are a lot of cybersecurity reports out there that study, okay, based on this sector, this is the threat and these are the hackers. So there's a lot of threat intelligence out there that you can get on the internet online for free. And you say, okay, which hackers target which sector the most, and in what way are they targeted? So you can use that and say, okay, based on this report, or you can get 3, 4 different reports that our sector has this, you know, are usually being targeted by these threat actors. And then you have to understand, okay, what's a worst case scenario? What are we going to lose? And then you just have to convince them qualitatively through a kind of a risk assessment saying, look, by just investing this much money, we can get this, by this. And usually actually you can get a lot already through cybersecurity awareness, which I think you're doing, right? So this is actually very valuable. But it shouldn't be fear-based. So that's what I'm trying to say. It shouldn't be based on fear, because fear-based, let's say, cybersecurity awareness is rarely effective. I mean, it could be effective to a certain point, but you don't engage them. They're not engaged. They're more defensive rather than positively engaged. And you want them to be positively engaged, because if in your organization, every single person is your eyes and your ears, that's powerful, you know. So
thanks,
sorry,
Rosanna.
I tend to talk, have to interrupt me.
No, it's great. I'm just aware of time. It looks like there is no easy answer to this big question. Excellent question. Thanks, Veronica. I think Liliana wanted to share very quickly, coming back to our previous question on Zoom, and then we have Ihor, and I'm also aware of time, and I wanted to ask if that's fine if we stay still for another 10 minutes and finish not at 6, but at 6:15. Would that be fine for everyone? Okay, if that's fine, I'm giving over to Liliana. for a short question.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. Well, after the incident of our previous call, I actually got informed and I filed a complaint to the police, the Belgian police. So that is called police on the web. On the internet. But at the European level, there is a website where all the information is actually shared. So it's the Europol. I have shared it here on the chat. I don't know if you see it. So basically, everyone who felt affected by the attack could also inform it to the police. We have, I don't recommend you to see it, but we have some recordings of the what happened. So it could be, for example, Veronica, I remember you were there, Dimitro, Oksana, I think was also there, Ivana. So it could be possible that you look into the Europol website and also file a complaint in your local police if you want it. But I did it here in Belgium.
Thanks a lot, Liliana. It's indeed very useful. And now, Igor, you raised your hand. Do you also have a question? And could you please also introduce yourself, because you joined a bit later and we haven't heard from you yet. Thanks.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. It was interesting, and I mean, 1 hour left just easily for me here. And so my name is Igor Katsuba. I'm a researcher and doing business in cybersecurity, mostly with EU, but originally I'm from Ukraine, and right now I'm here. And I just want to comment a bit regarding culture of cybersecurity. So my perception of this fact, it doesn't work. I mean, we observed here in Ukraine that in 2017, after NotPetya, there was a buzz around about the cybersecurity, but in state-owned companies, they were happy because there is an extra budget, right? They can buy something for cybersecurity. Some people had different motivations and different goals in this particular thing. But I just want to compare it. Sorry, do not perceive it as a sexism, but it's like high heel shoes. Like there are different things why we wear them. But just imagine, cybersecurity is high heel shoes minus one size, right? I mean, it's uncomfortable. Cybersecurity is always slow you down. Cybersecurity slows down business processes, software development. It slows down, uh, I don't know, communication between people. It it it's a nightmare for some people with lack of computer literacy. There are a lot of things, and I just want you to introduce the approach, which is widely used in the world. I mean, the liability. So they introduce high fines to not for not compliance with regulations. It usually it is in critical infrastructure. I mean, CISO, which is Chief Security Officer in critical infrastructure, for instance, uh, he receives quite high salary, but he goes to the jail if the attacks happens. I mean, that makes them to be compliant. That makes them to follow all the rules. And I think that again, we are human beings. I mean, the toys we buy for our kids, right, with Bluetooth interface, they're easily hackable. I mean, we can hack them, and we can talk to your kids, to our kids, but we buy it because of the marketing, because of the price. We buy TV set in our and install it in our bedroom based on the price. Basically, we don't care about cybersecurity compliance. I mean, we just buy what we like, and this smart TV is hackable. And I mean, I believe that there must be, and especially for this, ENISA introduced, and European Parliament supports this cybersecurity certification. They try to, they understand the nature of human beings, right? They understand that we need to, impose those things just because we cannot rely on the capacity, I mean, trainings and capacity. Of course, it works, but in some specific cases, there must be regulation, there must be top fine, there must be an understanding for CISO that he will go to the jail. I mean, in Ukraine, we lack this, right? I mean, because in legislation, a critical infrastructure owner is responsible for that, but basically he can do nothing. And regarding European things, because I participate a lot, and just 3 weeks ago I won Horizon project, quite big one for smart cities, and we introduced the module there. So basically, by the way, we will pilot it in Brussels smart city. And so we developed a digital forensic readiness component for smart cities. Also, we are participating with Europol and Carabinieri from Italy and Romanian police with in projects for using artificial intelligence for digital forensic. And this is also very good domain. I mean, because digital forensic readiness, it's really crucial part right now in any smart infrastructure, just because it's not like conventional crime. In conventional crime, policeman just goes to the scene, try to collect something, categorize it or something like that. But in digital sphere, in smart infrastructures, we need to have something retrospectively. We need to have traces in place. We need to have some instruments how to collect them in accordance to different jurisdictions, because one attack, I mean, Ukraine was attacked, like, let's imagine, from North Korea through proxy servers in Norway, and then using some tools in Austria, and then Ukrainian infrastructure. So who is responsible, right? We need to be compliant with all these jurisdictions. And I think that this digital forensic readiness is next big thing, and Europol articulates it a lot right now, and we easily incorporate it in any European Commission funded projects, because experts in DG units, they understand it quite clearly. So I believe that, it's like we need to, in cyber realm, we need to install something like CCTV camera when we can. So we like 40 years ago, we used CCTV cameras, for example, on nuclear power station, right? Not in our home and car. But now the recorders are so cheap, and we can install it everywhere. And we install it just to have this forensic readiness. I mean, when crimes happens, police will come and check the video recording. The same in smart infrastructure, I believe. We need to have something to support the decision making of law enforcement agencies. So those are my comments. But again, I'm really happy that these leaders I see here, concerned and do this really great job. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ihor. I will let Rosanna react and maybe also read one of the comments from Loredana, who asked to share some of the cybersecurity resources for beginners. So those professionals on the call, of course, you, Rosanna, and you, Ihor, if there is anything for the beginners, it would be nice if you could post it in the chat box, and some of us could look into it to get more details and start our introduction to the sector. Rosanna, we have only a few minutes for you to wrap up and maybe react to some of the questions and comment to people. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Maybe the first thing I'd just like to react to is cybersecurity as an analogy. So I wouldn't use the high heels as an analogy for cybersecurity. I would use more like the brakes of a car. So if you know how to stop a speeding vehicle, the result is that you can go faster. So I don't know if any of you have learned how to ski as well as an adult. once you know how to stop going down a steep path, you can go faster. So if you know how to brake, you can go faster. So this is the analogy I'd like to use for information security or cybersecurity. If you have your cybersecurity strategy in place, then your business can go faster. So we always have to remember that the core objective of cybersecurity is to enable the business. So the reason why we have to say this is because most of the time, the cybersecurity staff come from IT, and the focus is so much on the technology, forgetting that actually the technology is not the focus, it's the business. Cybersecurity has to enable the business, and we have to say that more and more because a lot of the people in cybersecurity are still fixated on security in and of itself. No, security is there to enable the business or to enable the organization's objectives or missions if it's public sector. So that's one thing. So the analogy of brakes is what I would say. So it stops you, but it also enables you to go faster because you know that you could go. So for example, you can scale up if you know that your system is sound. You have a sound network. You build up a sound, securely designed network, or your app is secure, then with this you can easily scale up because you have already have design built in. So there are going to be less risks. So really, I would say we are moving actually from a compliance-driven cybersecurity to one that we call risk-driven. So compliance-driven is how we've been practicing cybersecurity in the last few years. It's been driven by compliance and regulations and regulators. So that means we only do the bare minimum. That means there are a lot of lost opportunities, economical opportunities that are being lost because we're just doing the bare minimum. We're not going further. And a risk-driven approach to cybersecurity focuses on what are you missing out if you don't, if you're too afraid. So this is it. You have certain risks out there now more than ever before. So the risks are growing. So how can you design your cybersecurity network, your strategy, which starts with your policy all the way down to building your network, the actual network and the applications and the software. So how do you build it in such a way that it's robust? And that's what I say, it's anti-fragile. If it gets attacked, it will not only survive, it will actually grow and get better. So this can be done if you understand what the risks are, and your cybersecurity is driven by your risk management, your risk assessment, rather than compliance. Compliance is a bare minimum. Going over it is risk. So that means compliance is well understood. You have to comply. But what about the other aspects of your business that are not regulated? So compliance-driven cybersecurity is not enough. And that's what we've been practicing in the last few years, at least in Europe, and it hasn't been enough. So also mainly also because our regulators that are putting this in compliance in place is maybe 5 to 10 years behind technology itself. So it's not even possible because a lot of our digital systems are not even, there are no regulations. So it's still like the wild, wild west. And that's the result. The result of that is that we have big companies like Facebook, Google, actually making use of our data without our consent, So that's why a compliance-driven cybersecurity is actually something that we should outgrow and go back and focus on what is the objectives and mission of our organization, and then create a risk management strategy that will actually steer our cybersecurity strategy in such a way that we don't lose opportunities, so that we can go faster, because we know that we are capable of dodging these, we know how to stop, we know how to go faster, we have full control. So I think that's all that I wanted to say about CISO going to jail. That's actually worse than the CISO going to jail is that the business has to go bankrupt. You know, okay, the CISO will go to jail, but what's the worst is actually that everybody loses their money, you know, and okay, the CISO goes to jail, but I don't think that's something that's practiced here. So I don't think that the CISO carries so much liability. I know my previous, if we can think of it in an analogy again, like there are architects and there are engineers, and I know when you build a building or a bridge, to a certain extent, engineers and architects are liable, or even the contractor, and it has to be still proven in the court of law. So it's hard to actually determine that a failure of a system is due to the management, the CISO, because if you did that, a lot of CISOs will be in jail right now because of the daily breaches that's happening. It's just impossible. You know, we'll have, and we need CISOs because these are usually people who are well trained, and there's a skills gap right now. So we can't afford to put our professionals in jail for every data breach. Or yeah, I don't know if that's enough for you guys, but I think I'll end here because I tend to talk too much.
Thanks a lot, Rosanna. It was extremely useful. I believe for everyone. I personally learned a lot, and all of us, we learned how to protect ourselves from Zoom bombing for sure. And we also got even into bigger questions. I think we opened the door for more discussions, which we should have in depth. So maybe we'll also discuss with our team in the European Digital Development Alliance if we should have more talks like that and go maybe a bit deeper into cybersecurity and data protection. Thanks a lot, Rosanna. It was amazing. I would just like to let everyone know that we will upload this meeting into YouTube, that wider public could also listen to what we learned today, that it's also a learning opportunity for others. We decided to keep this meeting very close. Just between us, between members of the Alliance and partners of the Alliance, but we would like to engage, of course, wider public around those issues. So I hope that that's okay, and we will keep you updated about our next steps. Thanks, everyone, and have a nice evening.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Rosanna.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosanna. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.